Hi, I'm Bebedora and welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you a recipe for egg and onion pie. This is something that was common during the medieval ages because eggs are a complete healthy protein and meat was very expensive. This recipe is actually my grandmother's, so I have jotted down the generalized ingredients because we actually just make it by memory and feel. So you can start with a pie crust. For this one, I'm going to use a rolled pie crust, but a pressed pie crust, such as the King Arthur pie crust, is an amazing addition to it. It does give it a slightly heavier crust, but that is really good for filling, or being filling. But for this one, we're just going to go with a rolled one. So you're going to roll it out to approximately 2 fingers width, wider than your pie pan that you're going to need. You can pause there. Now when you're rolling your pie dough, it's really important to flour along as you need so that your rolling pin doesn't stick. This one I've rolled out to about the right size. Now, when transferring your pie dough to your pie plate, there's something really important that a lot of people forget, and that is it is best if you actually butter your pie plate first. The reason being is most pie dough recipes already have a fair bit of either lard or butter in them. This one is a butter-based recipe. So you want to use the same when it comes to greasing your pie plate. And you want to grease it first because even though there is a lot of butter in here, there is also flour. And flour and butter will stick without that extra oil barrier between it and your baking surface. So I just have a bit of butter in the bottom of the pan, and I'm going to take my paper towel and I'm going to focus primarily on the crease where the pan is, because I find that that is where most of the time my pies like to stick. And I do give it a really good coating because it is about a half a teaspoon's worth of butter in there, but I really don't like trying to get pie crust out of a pan when it's super sticky.
Okay.
Now, when I roll my pie crusts out, I like to roll it onto floured wax paper, and that's for one of 2 reasons. The first reason my mom absolutely enjoys, which is it makes it easier for me to clean up when I'm done. The second reason is it actually makes it easier for me to transfer it to the pie pan. So what I'm going to do, I'll brush the extra flour that I have here off, and then I'm going to pick it up in this, and then transfer it over. I'm actually just going to put the prepared pie pan up. So much better than folding it. It's a little bit awkward because I'm trying not to be in the middle of the shot for you guys. But yeah, then to press it down, you simply lift up the edges. This is why we rolled it 2 fingers of width wider than our pan, is to allow for the allotments on the sides. Then you simply press down the edges, and you can shape them any way you want. I'm just going to do the traditional pull and pinch so I can cut the excess around from the edges. You can use a fork, you can use a fancy crimping tool. I'm not that fancy, and I just want to show you guys how to bring life to some of your favorite recipes or recipes you want to try and have fun. Because cooking is art, but it is also a way for you to connect to the people who are eating your food and show them the fun experience that you had making it. It should be a little bit more enjoyable. It doesn't have to just be a necessity. Okay.
Good.
Now with this, you just run a knife around the edges and set it off to the side, which is what I'm going to do now. So I'm just going to preheat the oven on convection to 350 degrees. With this recipe, it's actually pretty easy, but the one important thing to control is the heat throughout the whole entire video, whether it's going to be for sauteing our onions or if it's for baking the pastry. Now I'm going to prep the pan for sauteing, which is really, really easy. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to add a little bit of oil, just the smallest bit, and that's just to start it. And the reason why I'm adding oil is because I will be adding a little bit of butter later, but you don't want to brown the onions for this, but you also don't want to burn your pan. So I'm going to turn it on to a medium-low heat to start because I need the pan to get warm first. Now, while I do that, I'm going to cut some of the onions. Now, I'm not a professional chef, which is a good thing, because if I was and I was cutting these this way, which is the way I've done it my whole life, chefs like Gordon Ramsay would probably call me a donut or a sandwich or whatever, an idiot sandwich. But the reason I do it this way is I don't like long stringy bits, and neither did my grandmother, and I don't like cutting myself. I also really don't like the sting from onions. This is a sweet onion, which it's actually pretty important to use the sweet onions if you want a sweeter flavor, but any onion will work because it's only been well, it was only me who started using the sweet onions in our family's line. Make sure you don't cut your fingers, especially when you get to this part. For this, just the tips of your fingers. If you're really, really nervous, you can hold the edge with a toothpick, but I've actually been cooking for a really long time, so I've gotten pretty good at the prep work, and I'm not actually too worried about it. I will note, and I have verification, I did wash my hands very thoroughly before I started, and it is always incredibly important to wash your hands for sanitation reasons, as well as to not transfer flavors. Okay. Also, always use a sharp knife. The reason why you want to use a sharper knife is you are way less likely to hurt yourself using a sharp knife than a dull knife, because you don't have to apply as much pressure and there's less chance of your hand actually slipping or the blade slipping because it's dull. You're easier to cut than a lot of the things that you cut. Okay. I'm just going to pop these onions into the bowl. I did cut a whole medium large onion, and that's because I want to make sure that when it cooks down, there is still going to be quite a bit of onion. It is egg and onion pie, although it actually is egg, onions, and old cheddar cheese, although you can use any type of cheese you want. I prefer the stronger flavors like cheddar or Gouda. Actually, a smoked Gouda and regular Gouda blend makes a really, really good pie. This is not as finicky as a quiche, but they are really closely related. So I've got my onions prepped. I'm just waiting for my stove, for my pan to get a little bit warmer. It is on medium-low heat, so it won't get really, really warm, but I still want to control the temperature. And I can feel the heat from where my hand is, so I know that my pan has come up to heat. So I'm just gonna spread the oil a little bit and pop the onions down. Now, you want a larger pan for doing this because you want to spread your onions out. You want a thinner layer. And this process will take a little bit. You don't want to brown them because cooking them this way brings out a more savory and less, I find, bitter taste to the onions, which if you have people in your family, like my darling boyfriend and cameraman, who don't really like onions, you really don't want to enhance their harsher flavors. You want to bring out their mellower flavors. Okay, I'm going to let this warm up, and I'm going to just make sure that that's on a medium. It needs to be about a 3, but there's no 3 on the stove. Okay. At this point, I would recommend grating your cheese, but my boyfriend did that for me because he's being super helpful. This is just over 2 cups. And I want to make sure that there's extra just in case, because I do try to layer a little bit in. Sometimes it doesn't always work out, especially if you have hungry helpers in your kitchen who are eating your cheese as you are cooking. That will not happen this time. Okay.
Are we good?
I'm just going to give these a quick stir, just lifting them up, turning them over. Oh, and the pan wants to move a little bit too. And then I will resettle them back down to a thin layer because I want the heat to distribute evenly, but I really do not want them to brown. I'm just trying to get them to go a little bit, they turn a little bit clear. Now over here, I'm going to crack and separate the eggs. There are many different ways of doing this, but I'm just going to go with the way that I was taught, which is to use the eggshell. Now, I want the yolk to go in that bowl, but the whites to go in this one. So I'm going to separate over the metal bowl. And I actually find that it's a little bit easier to whip up egg whites in a metal bowl versus a ceramic or a glass bowl. And I'm sure there's an actual reason for it, but I wouldn't know it. Fine if your yolks break, as long as they break into your yolk bowl. Oh, that didn't break the way I wanted it to, but that happens. You might actually notice sometimes when you're breaking an egg that there's this thin white cord. It's called the chalaza, and what it does is it actually helps center the yolk in the middle of the egg so that if they were fertilized, the embryo would have a better chance of staying alive if the egg were to be jostled. I'm a little worried about this one not wanting to pop properly and getting eggshell in there. So I'm going to peel the big chunks away. And I think I was pretty smart to do that. Okay, the other way of straining eggs, which I'm going to do because this one broke, is you just strain them into your fingers. And I am going to wash my hands again after I've handled the egg anyway. But this just solidifies that need to. I'm trying to get the excess white off. I personally don't like doing it this way, but that's just because I do not like the feel of egg whites. Also, I find it really messy, easier to drop the eggs. It's a very valid way, I just personally don't like it. If you were to get a piece of eggshell into your eggs, you can actually use a damp paper towel to pick up the eggshell while leaving most of the egg white behind. This egg has a particularly strong shell, which is unusual because they're store-bought eggs. There we go. And sometimes that happens. Same thing, you can just use your fingers. Oh look, great example of the chalaza. It's still attached. It's not going to hurt you, it's just more protein. Some people say they have a slightly bitter taste, though I wouldn't know, I've never separated it. I'm just going to wash my hands.
Okay.
Yeah. So back at our onions, you can see, if you go in a little bit closer here, see how they're starting to turn a little bit see-through and white around the edges. This is the stage that we want. At this point, just gonna give it one more good stir. Oh, perfect. This one's got a really good example. See, it's a little bit see-through. Here, opaque. That's the word I was looking for. So at this point, I'm gonna layer them again. And there's already less bulk in the pan than there was earlier. Now I'm just gonna take just a normal bit of water, because all you need to do is pour enough that it covers the base of your pan, but your onions aren't floating. And that's really important. You don't want to cover the tops of all of them. You just want to cover the bottom of the pan, and then pop the lid on to let it steam. Yep. So at this point, I'm just going to start to mix up the egg whites. Now, we're not going to beat them into stiff peaks. We're not that worried about it, but you do want to beat them until they actually become a little bit cloudy and frothy. You can already see how it is turning a little cloudy. And the reason being is you want to incorporate a little bit of air so it's not too dense, but it's not as finicky. You don't have to have those perfect stiff rain peaks. You're going to be adding your egg yolks back into it anyway. So this is a good starting point. This would be where you're starting to make your egg whites. You beat them for longer and they'll make your peaks for your meringues and things like that. I am going to beat it a little bit longer, but that's because as I move the foam away, I can see that the egg whites are still very yellowy and clear, and I want them a bit more white. So I just mixed it for about a minute more. Just didn't want to bore you with the scene. And as you can see, everything looks a little bit cloudy. It actually kind of looks a bit like melted clouds. And I love this stage. It's so much fun to play with. But that's about where we want it to be. And it really doesn't take very long to mix it up by hand. Maybe a minute and a half at the very most. So now I've got our yolks. And here is a half teaspoon of salt, and I've got a teaspoon of pepper. Now, this is salt and pepper to taste. I don't really like really salty things, so I'm only going to use a light bit of salt. But I love pepper in eggs, so I'm going to add a little bit and then look to see how it looks so I don't add too much, because I have a bad habit of doing that. And it looks like half a teaspoon should be enough. So I'll just pop the rest away. I just wanted to break up the eggs and mix in the seasoning first. Now I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of heavy cream. Now, we don't really have heavy cream here, but we do have whipping cream, which is very similar. I grew up on a farm, so I kind of got spoiled with things like that because we had cows. So I'm just going to pour it in. And I want to incorporate it thoroughly. So I will mix this for about a minute, and then I'll see you guys right back here. So I was just checking our onions, and as you can see, they've gone fairly opaque. They kind of look like ghost guts. That may put you off of onions, and I'm sorry, but they do. You can see them, but you can mostly see the way through them too. And as you can see, there's still water in the bottom of the pan. See? And we just actually want to cook until most of that water is gone. We're going to have to pay close attention because we do not want to brown them. Not yet. So I'm just going to evenly layer them back out again. I'm going to move them a little bit away from the center though, because the center of the pans are slightly raised and this area doesn't have as much moisture, so it's more likely to brown here, and I don't want that. Okay. So I just took the lid off of this to give it a stir, and the water is almost gone, which is about the point where we want. And I'm going to just let the steam escape now so that the last little bit of the water can come out. And I'm just gently making sure they don't stick to each other. But I want to keep it moving a little bit. So I think a few more minutes and this will be ready. So while we do that, I'm going to finish up with our egg mixture and just show you what it's looking like now. So if you come over here. So I just whisked it for about a minute more. There's nothing special to it. It's still its normal self. I just whisked until I saw that while I was whisking, there's a bit of bubbles forming on the edge. And they're staying a little bit longer, and that was just what I was told to look for. And it's reached that point. I don't know if there's a scientific reason why it needs to be like that, but this is one of those things where I was taught by my great-grandmother, and I just kind of follow what she said because she knew what she was doing. And when something works really well, and you know there's a reason for it, but you cannot remember, you just leave it as it is.
Okay.
Yep.
What?
Yes. So giving this a stir, you can actually see that the onions are leaving faint trails of themselves. And they try to stick together when you move them. They try to move with each other. This is the exact point that you really want to get to. And I will add just a little bit of butter and brown it in that so it gets that buttery flavor without actually browning the onions. Oh, it's harder to get the center pieces from the center than I thought. 1 second. Still going?
Yep.
So I just have a little bit of butter here. And I'm going to melt it. And then add the onions into that. And this is going to give it a nice flavor, because butter and onions are amazing together. At this point, you can caramelize onions for caramelized onions if you want by letting them brown, but we don't want caramelized, so I'm not going to let them brown. We're just going to... They get a little bit yellow, and that's when you know that they're good. It really doesn't take too long, and you want to keep them moving. But it's more not the onions that you're paying attention to, but the juices in the pan itself. that you're looking at, because when the butter browns, then you know it's ready. Butter doesn't take very much to brown, but it has this wonderful flavor that I can't quite describe. You gotta taste it to see. But yeah, this won't take too much more. And then I'm just going to set it to the side to cool down to around room temperature, because I need to add it to my egg mixture. And you don't want to add hot things to egg mixture because it will cook. And we don't want it to do that until it's in the oven.
Okay.
So as I move this around, you can see more and more of the sugars and things like that leaving trails behind you as you're done, and this is when you know that you've got the right consistency. The onions like to stick to each other. They like to leave the little sugar trails. And I'm just going to scrape them all up, take it off the heat, wait for a moment, and then spread them back out to cool. Just want to let the pan kind of cool a little bit first. Turning off the stove. Okay. Now this is way less onion than when we first started cooking them, and this is why I wanted to use one medium large onion, because it does cook down a fair bit, but you've kind of just concentrated the flavor and brought out different parts and flavor notes to it. It will be more sweet because we've cooked the sugar to the forefront. Got a little bit of onions stuck on the scraper, and it's hot, so I don't want to touch it. I've made that mistake lots of times. Hope I have moved past that point. There we go. Now I'm just going to let this cool for a little bit, and we'll be right back. While this is cooling, I'm actually going to pop the eggs into the fridge so that they can stay cool, just for food safety.
Done?
So now that the onions are cool, I'm going to add in the yolk and spices and cream mixture. Just giving it a mix to make sure I can get all the spices off the bottom. And give this a good whisk to mix it together. Okay, to that I'm going to add about half the cheese. Give it its final whisk. Now instead of the whisk, I'm going to use the fork, because I'm going to put in our cooled onions. Now, because it is Teflon, I am trying very hard not to scratch or actually touch in any way point the metal of the pan. So I'm being very, very gentle, just trying to get the stuff to come out. And some of it's sticking. Okay, with this you just give it a stir to incorporate it all together. And then I'm going to pour it into the prepared pie dough over here. to even it out. Trying to make sure that the filling goes towards the edges as well as in the center. Okay, I'm going to put that in the oven, which is at 350 degrees. And I'm going to bake it for, I'll check on it in 15 minutes. I believe it should bake for about half an hour, but I'm going to check every 15 minutes just to make sure. And we'll see when it's done.
Good.
Okay, so it's time to check on the egg and onion pie. It should be done. It's been about 20 minutes. It wasn't ready at 15. And it's just a test between 15 to 30 minute mark to see how long it takes. Different oven temperatures will take different times. It's something that it's just trial and error, so keep an eye on it. Every 5 minutes past 15. So it looks great. It's all golden and it's nice and fluffy, but to test it, I'm going to use a toothpick and insert it in through the center. And see how there's no liquid egg on the toothpick? It has a little bit of stuff come up, but that's because, unlike a cake, it is just eggs and cheese. So there will be a little bit of cling, but it's pretty much clean. So now I'm just going to take it out of the oven. Now, if you do want to eat it hot, you're going to have to let it sit for at least 5 minutes, but it is also really good cold or even the next morning. And that's it. Thank you very much.
And there we had a gun. The end.